Okay, just want to kind of compare the differences, especially the differences between Dart and Java. And when I started with Flutter, I didn't really take this tutorial or some other tutorial to learn Dart. But now when I go back, I realize that if I knew some of these little Dart language features earlier, it might help me to understand some of the code a lot better. Okay, so of course, the Dart language itself is also a very complete language, even though it's more concise and simpler. But we will only probably spend this one lecture just to go through the most important parts, which is shown here. You can actually take a look at this tutorial. It's a very good tutorial with a lot of examples. It's provided by Google and hosted in this code labs. So they just try to highlight the differences, the most important things for Dart, especially if you know Java very well. I think this is the perfect tutorial for you. Okay. By the way, who have not programmed in Java or Java? You barely use that. Okay. All right, that's good. So even C++, I think it's good enough. Okay, so you will find this tutorial really easy and to follow, and it's very useful. Especially it highlights the differences between Dart and Java. So let's take a look at some of this. Okay. All right, so I'm going to start from here. The second unit here, create a class. Okay, it's a very simple concept. But before that, we need to talk. Let me go back to our Flutter project. So let's not look at the code for the app today, but let's just create another one for just a learn Dart. Okay. All right, so that's a Dart file. And the very first thing is actually they talk about the class. But before we talk about the class, they have their own way to write the main method, which I already showed you last time. So in Java, actually, you know what? Let's just go back also to create a Java class. All right. So in Java, think about 140, what you learned. Okay, public static void main. All right, and then the teacher told you about this hello world example. All right, that's how you can do Java. All right, so a main method. So in Dart, okay, you're gonna do this. Before we talk about that, like, I don't know if you had this experience, but from the teacher point of view, I also taught Java occasionally. It's pretty easy to explain what this one does, okay, because in one line, the command says print. It's very straightforward, makes so much sense. And then when you run it, it shows the word. You can tell people, well, this one print the message on the console on the screen. But the really difficult part is, why do we need to have this long main method? What is public? What is static? And also, why do we have this class? What is a class? So these are the concepts that you really don't need to teach the student on day one. But because how the Java works, you do need to put that inside the main method, and the main method must stay in a class, even though the class might not be related with what this one do. Right? So that's why a lot of new languages suddenly started to become more popular. And they actually, if you look at a lot of these new languages, Go, like Dart, and some other ones, a lot of those are still based on Java's idea. But they all share the one common thing, that they make the language much easier and concise, or more compact than Java. Okay, because Java is just too heavy. Also the Kotlin, okay, the Android official language, it's basically still using JVM, but when you write Kotlin, you can just ignore a lot of these details. Okay, so go back to Dart. As I told you, Dart had this main method, just like this. All right, very straightforward, and then you don't have to do the class or other parameter anymore. And then the print also is really simple. You don't need to do the system out, just do a regular this. And then you still need a semicolon at the end of the line. So if you run this code here, all right, so that's going to give you the result. Okay, so compare this one with that one, you can see the culture Dart supports. Okay, just try to be concise and compact. All right, so that's the main method. All right, so go back to the tutorial. How do you define a class? All right, so this one gives you a class of a bicycle with 3 parameters. Okay, and then we can do the same thing. All right, and then this one, you can't really see a big difference in Java. Let's not do the bicycle, we're gonna do a student, right? Student have normally what do you do? Okay, you do like a name, and then you do maybe age, and also maybe an ID, or something like this, 3 attributes. And then we told you the private is the best practice. And from there, you will need to do the getter setters. And then in the IntelliJ, you can generate all of those, right? So these are a very typical way to define a class. So in the object-oriented design course, we actually talked the reason to have these getter and setters. But before we review those, in Dart, that's the way it's recommended how you write the code. Okay, so if you have a class, student, and you don't really need to do all of those. You can just directly go with name, you can go with age, and then you can go with ID. All right. So that's how Dart is recommending you put all the classes, especially for the data part. Okay. Now your question might come. Okay, so how do I do private or public? Okay, so if you look at this tutorial, let's take a look at some of these observations. Very important. Okay, first of all, your main method is separated from the your class. Okay, at the top level, and then you don't have this private keyword anymore. But it doesn't mean that you cannot define private. So we'll talk about that shortly. And everything by default is public. All right, so you don't really need to put any public keyword. It's always public by default. And then they use 2-character indentation convention. So in Dart, as you can see, by default, when you hit enter, it gives you 2 characters as indentation. All right. So I don't know if you see this 2-character indentation. A very typical place you can find is if you look at Google's open source project. I think most of those code are 2 characters. I guess that's kind of a convention they were using inside the company. That's why I think Google created Dart, and it's not surprising that they still do 2. I think it makes sense to use 2 because nowadays the modern language all could have very long lines, have a lot of blocks, and especially for Dart later you will see when you program the UI, you have a lot of containment relationship, and all of those needed indentation. So if you always use 4, very quickly your code will go very far to the right, so it's very hard to manage. Okay. So that's why the 2-character makes a lot of sense. Okay, so that's how you define the class. So that means that everything is by default public, and if they're public, the way to use that is just the same as Java. You can directly access and control all the attributes. So for example, let's try it. So I have this student class. If I want to create an object, all right, so that's how you do it. All right, so you use this variable keyword to declare a variable, and you don't have to specify the type. Okay, and I have my first student as S1, and then you can do new student, just like Java. The idea is the same thing. You're creating an object. All right, but I did tell you that last time you can do just this, okay, without using the new keyword. Okay, so if you still feel comfortable to use this one, that's fine. I think it makes your code more, readable in terms of meaning, but Dart just suggests that you do not use new anymore. Okay, same idea, no difference. Now, once you have this, then you can do s1.name. Those are all the similar as Java. Okay, you use the dot to access all the attributes, but because they're all public, then you can just access them anywhere you want. All right, so S1, and then D. All right, that's how it works. So this part, no difference. In Java, you can do exactly the same thing using public, or by default visibility, you can still access it. All right, but Dart wants to be simple, so that's why you can always start with this one. Now, go back here in Java. Okay, obviously the private exists for certain purposes. And for those of you who took the object-oriented design course, I don't know if you learned why do we use private. And then when do you use private, or when do you use the public? Let me ask you a couple questions. I don't know how many of you actually did the class with me. My first question is, let's say in Java or in a regular object-oriented programming language where you have this private or public, when you define when you define the variables for the classes, which visibility do you choose? How do you decide if you want to use private or public? Sam?
Private by default, and then go up if you need to.
Okay, why is that?
If you have it protected or public, and then you're changing it all over the place, you don't have any one place to make it private. You have getters and setters. You can only change it there. You can change how that happens only in one place.
Okay. So Sam, you're suggesting basically you always start with the private unless you really need public. Okay. Has anyone been working with, yes?
Whether it's not in the
that's correct, but I think we're talking about even if you do want to expose, right? At the private, you can still expose this through other methods. So the question is for the declaration for the variable itself, public or private, which one is better? Who prefer public all the time? No one? So everyone, your Java classes are all private? Are you sure? All right, yeah, the correct answer, Sam was the correct answer, okay. I haven't taught that course for a couple of years, but that's something we highlighted in the very beginning. For Java or for in general, object-oriented programming design principles, it should always be private as possible, okay? It is a very important and good practice because that's basically the idea behind object-oriented design. Object-oriented design, we highlight this concept of encapsulation, okay? We want the users to really easily be able to use your classes. So for example, I give you this class called, just say student, okay? There is a method called get transcription, print transcription. And you really don't want to worry about how that internally is being implemented, what kind of algorithm, what kind of data structures being used there. All you want to do is create a student dot and then print transcription. And then you get a result. So from the user point of view, that's the best way to use this code, to use this class. And we really do not want to understand how you implement it. Okay. So if you make everything private, as private as possible, the outside caller, the developer cannot see it, cannot change it. And also it's much easier for them to use because they don't have to learn all these details. And also for safety issues, concerns, then you don't need to worry about people who actually automatically access its attribute and variable and change something. And everyone can have the access, they can just modify the value at any point. So there's no control, right? So that's why always start with the private. Okay, that's always the recommended way. And then for the getter and setters, okay, if I start with the private and then I make this getter and setters, so that brings me to the next question, okay? Even though these things are private, but through getter and setters, I can still read and write in any way I want. And because the getter and setters are public, so what is the point? What is the difference between a private plus a getter and public getter and setters? And I just make everything public. Because eventually the factor is same, right? I can still change this name through and getter and setter anytime I want, anywhere I want. Well, why do you bother to build this one and then mark this as private? I understand, okay, private sounds like a good principle, but you add getter and setter. What is the purpose of getter and setter?
Potentially there might be a side effect of value. Calculate that setup and add
right.
Later.
Yeah, very good. So don't underestimate the power of getter and setter. Okay, most of the time you're just writing this very simple, short method to set the variable, to return the variable. However, don't forget these are blocks. Okay, that means you could actually put extra code here. You could put extra code here. Okay, some examples we normally use, for example, for set name, right? Name must just contain characters. You can't give me a 1, 2, 3, and that's not a valid name. So if that's the case, I can do an if statement. I can check if the name, contains. I can use a regular expression to see if there are any kind of digits or non-alphabetic letters included. If that's the case, I'm going to throw exception, or I'm going to basically ask you to do it again. Okay. Another good thing to do for set, very common in some of the important systems, especially like financial system. We need to really make sure we know when do we change all these numbers and then who changed those numbers. Think about you're building a financial system for a bank, okay? And then if you don't control that very well, everyone can change their balance. That's actually not a good thing. So I can print, just do a log statement, or just simply just as print an example. And then I can say, which user, change the name into what kind of value here. So that means every time when people are calling the set name setter method, this method with this statement will be executed. So you will have a log there. And of course, the log shouldn't be just a print. You should have a log in the file. But it forces everyone to go through this procedure. And so it's managed. Right. So that's basically the reason why we want to have getter and setter, because it at least gave you the opportunity to control it if you want. Right. So don't underestimate this little feature here. They exist for some of the reasons. Okay. So for Dart, it totally changed the idea. They just say that by default it's public, but you can still make private. We'll talk about that. I really can't justify why they want to do this. My only explanation is, they just want to make the language simpler. And also for mobile, I think it's quite different from the regular Java development. Mobile, most of the time your code just sit together for one application. It's very rare that you depends, you import another app as a dependency. Okay. But if you do write a third-party library, a Dart library, I think you should still follow all these best practices. Okay, that's why by default they thought that, well, maybe this one will be easy for the developer to use. They don't have to worry about all this keyword and getter, etc. So they just try to be simple. But you should understand there will be some kind of balance and trade-off. Okay, you need to make. All right. So by default it's all public. That's why you can do things like this. All right. And then they also talk about the constructor. This is actually a big change, and then you really want to understand this one because in the code you will see a lot of these examples. All right. So constructors, okay, very easy to build in Java. You do public, okay, and then student. All right. So you got to pass these 3 attributes: name, age, and also ID. And then you're going to use this character keyword to do all of this. Yeah. All right, so same thing. So you can do exactly the same thing in Dart. So if I copy this part here, copy it over. So that still works. Okay, same, class same. You don't have to do public. There's no public. Everything by default is public. And then parameters, you still have this keyword, works in the same way. So that still works. So now I need to basically provide my input parameter for the constructor. So that's one way to make it work. However, Dart really recommend you use the simpler way, which is this. Okay, so that's what you see from a lot of sample code. So you just need to do this. That's it, and then you don't have to provide all of this. Okay, so that's how you can make a constructor in Dart. From the sample code, you can see this a lot. Basically, you have to map all this attributes one by one. The first one will be given to name, the second one will be given to age, and then the third one will be given to the ID. Right? So that's how it works. Okay, but you can still use the old-fashioned way to do it. All right, but when you do this one, okay, you can't really put any extra code here. All you're doing is just assign the variable to the attribute. But if you do want to do something extra in the constructor, you still have to go back to the original way and adding a block of code to do the extra code. All right, constructor has no body. and just valid. You still need a semicolon at the end. This works in the same way. So that one is equivalent to this. All right. So that's how the constructor works. Formatted code. Okay, so they're talking about the Dart pad. We don't use that one, but there are a lot of editors. Most of the IDE today support the auto fixing the format. Okay, so you should actually know it. For example, in here in Android Studio, if you have a bad indentation, I think you can go to code. I think it's a code here, reformatted code or auto indent line. So this is very useful. Okay, so let's try this. So right now I have some kind of indentation off. So if I do code and auto indent, so I don't know why they're not. Do I need to select all of this? Okay, so that's gonna fix it, right? I don't know about auto formatting. What does that do? What kind of format they can do? Let me try. Let me try this. Okay, not sure if that's gonna do anything, but let's try it. So code, reformat. Oh yeah, so it does, you know, that for you. Yes. This one here. Reformat. Oh, sorry, I can't read it. Okay, all right, got it. Yeah, I think that's the same feature. Okay, so I think remember sometimes there's one point they mentioned that in Dart they have some kind of a they have some kind of a tool embedded, so they have this formatting taken care of. I forgot where it says. Anyway, just remember you can automatically format the code. That's actually very important because later on, for those of you who have started working on your app, this part here you're gonna get very messy. All the brackets, parentheses, all of this. I guess the format will help you a lot. Okay. All right, that's the constructor. You know, that's what you see here in the app code. Okay, so if you see some of the, you know, like this one here, this is the constructor. Obviously, this is a little bit more complicated because it has a parent class. They want to call the parent's constructor using a super. But as you can see here, they directly put this title here. And you don't see the regular this title equal to title, that kind of statement anymore. But you should know that it's just how the constructor works. All right, so what else? Let's go here. So instantiation. So basically, that's what I mentioned. You can do new or not. It doesn't matter. Looks like they just trying to get rid of the new keyword. It's optional. All right. So you don't have to do in Java. You need to do like a type and a student. So yeah, you can still do that, but looks like you can just declare that as a variable. I haven't really looked into exactly the difference. I think there might be some difference in terms of how you declare things differently, but just keep in mind right now, any kind of variable to start with, if you want to do something really quick, I think the variable keyword should be enough. They also mentioned about a constant. If you want to make it a constant, just use final. It's the same as Java. All right, so this is how you check the type if certain object is a type of certain class bicycle. What's the equivalent of statement in Java? How do you check types in Java? Never done that? So if I have this object, all right, so I create this object. I want to check if the object S is a type of string. How do I do that? Never do that? Yes. Instant up, right? Remember? This is really important because when you do a lot of the complicated hierarchies, you might need this, okay, based on what kind of type you have. And especially somebody else pass you a type that belongs to the parent type. Most of the time you shouldn't need to worry about that. That's what the object-oriented design is used for. But certain cases, if they don't have a perfect design, if they do have some special cases you need to handle, then you do need to use to check the type, make sure you're doing things right. Because also you probably need to do the type casting. That's another common case. Okay, that's how you do this one here. But in Dart, you use a different statement. Use this one here. Okay. All right, improve the output. So they're talking about the toString method. Looks like, as you can see from here, you can tell it just follows the same idea as Java. Okay, just try to make it a little bit easier to use. All right, so right now let's test if I just print this object, what will be showing up? Okay, if I just do this one here. All right, so it says that an instance of student. Okay, it doesn't tell me all the information. But if I want, I can write this toString method. Okay, looks like it's exactly the same way as Java. So you just need to return, for example, name, ID plus ID. All right, so that's the Java. We just return it, and then so that it can be printed. But this one doesn't work because age is a type of integer, and not like Java, it will do it automatically, cast that to the string. So we already showed you last time you can do a toString this way, and it's going to turn that into a string so that you can do the regular operator. And then let's run this again. So if I run this, now I can see a better format. Okay, because I'm overriding this toString method. This is exactly the same as Java. All right. So a couple of things, if you look at the example they provided, so they actually use this $sign, okay? So this one can really simplify a lot of work. So for example here, writing this age to string is kind of tedious, okay? So one way to do it, which might be better, is let's move this inside, okay? And then you can use this $sign to tell Dart that, well, this one depends on this variable value. As you can see, this one is automatically referenced to that variable, so the age will be automatically printed. So if we run this code again and give you the same result. So if you know that, I can just totally simplify the whole statement just like this. All right, so that should give you exactly the same result. Let's run this again, and that's how it works. Okay, so this one, we already saw that in the first example. If you remember, in our first screen, you click on a button, all right? You click on a button, it's going to increase that counter, right? The counter is right here as an integer. So every time you click on the button, well, we already replaced that. It's going to call this function called Increment Counter. That increases the counter value. But for the UI part, the text, that's how the counter value has been shows up. So they use this $sign and to show it. It's for private. That's how they do private. Yeah, so we'll take a look at that shortly. Yeah, initially I thought this is just a naming convention, but this means something, right? Okay, so that's how you do it. And then one more thing, guys. This is the one I have to mention a little bit. Okay, this character, how do you call it? This arrow. You should use this one in JavaScript a lot. Some of the modern JavaScript, React or Python. I don't know. Python don't have this. Java also has it, right? From Java 8, you can also have this. What is this called? Lambda, right? Lambda expression. All right. So again, it's a very popular way in the modern languages. I honestly don't really use this very often, but I do see in Dart program there's some examples they have a lot of this. So I do need to mention this. Okay. Very simple. Okay. When you see this character, just don't panic. Let's start from the main method. Okay. If you remember in our code here, that's how they write the main method, okay? Main, and then arrow key, expression, run that, okay? So all they're trying to do here is just trying to execute this line of code, which is, I think this is some kind of function, and then passing this object, that's how it works. But they use this lambda, and you can obviously just do this it works exactly the same way. Okay, if you consider that as, let's see what's wrong with it. Oh, and I don't need this one here. So that's totally equivalent to this one. So the lambda works by this way. If in your function you only have one line of code, remember, okay, this is very important. Only works for one single line of code. No matter how long the line is, no matter how complicated your parameters are, that's fine. If you only have one line of code, you could replace that with lambda expression because it looks concise. All right, so that's what you do. So you don't need to use the brackets. Just add lambda this way here, and then that's it. That's how it works. Okay. Now this function, because it's a void, so you don't have to return anything. So let's go back here. So if you want to turn this thing into a lambda, all right, this one must give you a string, right? So you must give a return. So what you can do is get rid of the brackets, all right, and then do this lambda. And in order to make it more concise, we don't require you to return it. Because from the return type, I know, okay, this function expect to see a return, which is the type of string. All you need to do is on the right-hand side, make sure this one line of statement or expression gave me a string. That's all they expect to see. All right. So if you have this one, then run this code. It shouldn't change any of the result. All right. But think about, look at this part here. It's just very, very clean, readable, concise, saves you some time if you're familiar with this kind of expression. Okay. But the bottom line, remember, any lambda expression can be converted back to a regular function. Okay, and no exception. But if you do want to use lambda, make sure it's only one line of code. If you have multiple lines of code, it won't work unless you make another function. All right. So that's how the lambda works. You will see this a lot. Okay. So let's actually check our app code. Do we have any other lambda expression? This is one example. Okay. Now this one probably makes more sense. This function method is called createState. Looks like it comes from the parent class because you're overriding it. This one returns a type of my next page state. This is the type. On the right-hand side, you're returning a new instance. Okay, so let's actually write this. This one basically is equivalent to this. Okay, I'm going to comment this one out. Is equivalent to this one here. And return new. That's what it does. All right. So one line, you ignore return, but in this case you can't return anymore, and you also ignore the new keyword. But same idea, just trying to create one. Okay. So, but just try to make it look better. All right. So that's the lambda. All right, so they support the $ expression. You can have a longer one. So for here, okay, for example, for age, okay, if you just want to do one value, you can do a $. But if you want to do more complicated things, you can have this brackets. You can do some kind of calculation. Okay, so if we do this one, all right, so that's how it works. But if you only have one variable, then you don't have to do the brackets anymore. Just do this way. One line functions, use this flat arrow. All right. Okay. So next one is also very important. Okay. Read-only variable. So that's how they do private variables. Okay. The answer is really simple. If you want something private, you don't use name keyword private. You use this convention. So for example, let's do ID maybe. Okay. Mark this one as a underscore. Okay, with a start with underscore, so that variable becomes a private. Okay, this is probably the second time I see in some kind of programming language that they use this kind of special code convention. Traditionally we saw this as a code convention, but they put that into some kind of meaning. Another best example would be Python. Right, the Python, the indentation all has meanings. So this is another case. All right. So in old days, sometimes they're like C++ developer. They like to use some kind of convention. I don't know if it's spelled underscore or some other prefix to name their variable names if they decide to make that as a private. So in the old days, sometimes people will do this, even though they mark this one as private, but they still use some kind of convention like this to tell people. The advantage is if you are inside the class and you don't see the declaration, but if you see the name, you immediately can get, oh, this is actually a private if people are following the convention. All right, so anyway, that's how you do that in Dart, okay? So once you do this one, okay, let's see what you need to change. This part is okay. You can just change the name into underscore. It's going to work in the same way because it's inside the class. Private is still open to all the internal usage. This one here, I'm not sure. It's okay, so it still works. So that means you can still pass the value and then give it to this ID, okay? Which makes sense because in Java, okay, so think about this one here. These are private, but you can still pass the value and give it to the private. So there's nothing wrong. It's just you can't really access that and change it outside this class. All right. Now this part here never doesn't work. And then if you put this underscore here ID, it still works. Okay. So this is not a typical private in Java. I dig into a little bit. So it turns out it's about the scope, the file. Okay. So looks like this private is still visible in the same file, but then when you go to a different file, it will not be available anymore. So let's try this. So I'm going to create another Dart file. All right. So here, let's create another main method. And then if I want to create another student, all right, so it automatically imported for me. And then now I need to provide the constructors. All right, so, but this time, if I try to do s1 dot ID, that will not work. Yeah, so there's more. It's become invisible, all right, because it's marked as private. So that's how Dart handle the private. But remember, this one here, you can still do it. But this is a very rare case because normally one class just has one file only has one class, right? So that you know, that's how to do it. All right. So that's a private variable. And then you can still build your getter and setter with the private, just like how you do it in Java. Right, so they have this little like a getter approach to write. So if you want to do a getter, you can do string get ID lambda underscore ID. This is totally like a new creation from Dart. Just remember, I thought I will actually use it. I would just probably still go with the regular approach. But anyway, that's how you build a getter. And then from here, we can then do s1.id. This one will become available to you. The reason it's called ID because here you said this is the ID. That's the name of the getter. Okay, that's how it works. Okay, this is a little bit weird statement to me. Pretty much we never seen this before, but just remember. But I guess if you want to do the regular getter, get ID, I don't see a reason why it doesn't work, right? So you can still do this one here, and then get ID, that still works in the same way. So if you want to still use old-fashioned Java way, that's totally fine. All right. So this part here talks about, yeah, they talk about private. Okay, you can still use that as a regular function and chain that internally, but just not externally. Right. All right. So these are very basic things so far. Any questions? Okay. So one more important thing. Next, this one here. Okay. It's called optional parameters. I think Java or Python also support this. I can't remember if Java had this kind of support. So the parameters, some of the parameters are optional, so you can pass them or not. the best example to explain this one, I think this is definitely a very good feature. All right. So let's take a look at here in Java. Okay. So go back to this example. So we talk about constructors. Okay. So right now I have 3 parameters. It's not uncommon to build something like this because sometimes I say, oh, I know a piece of information, I'm going to do that. But sometimes I don't know the ID. I'm going to ignore that. I only pass this to. Or I only know maybe name. Okay, I don't know the age. So don't worry about it. You can still create your class, something like this, right? But and also the problem is, you know, you actually can have more possibilities. What if I only know the ID, right? So you have to create it here. And then what if I only have, what's wrong with this one? Oh, you can't override this. So yeah, that's right. You can't actually do this one because the override, right? So sorry, the overload. These were exactly the same, right? So you actually can't do that. Unless the type are different. So for example, you could create another one. I can have, you know, an age and ID. All right. So you could have all of this. So these are called overloading, right? Same method name, but different type of a combination for the input parameters. So Java can figure out which method you're going to use based on the input parameter you provided. And obviously, you can also have empty constructor. That's okay. It's also overloading. That still works. So now this gave you a lot of flexibility down in terms of how do you create this class using different constructors. And in Dart, you don't have to write this way. You can say everything is optional. So go back to here. Let's try this, okay? Now, so far you provide 3 parameters, but you can also say this. You can wrap everything into a brackets. And then, okay, I'm not sure we can still do the private here. Okay, probably not. So I'm gonna get rid of this one here for now. Let's see how it works. So I'm gonna use the curly bracket to wrap these 2 parameters for the constructor. Now go back here, you could actually do different things. For example, you can still follow what it says to do the 2 parameters. But in this case, you have to specify which is what. So the Tom is for name, so you have to specify name. And then this one is for age. All right, so that they can map it to the actual constructor by using a name. So that means you could actually pass the parameters in different order. That still works. The nicer thing is you don't have to send this one as required. I only know the age, I can do this. Or I only know the name, I can do this. Because Dart know, okay, these are optional, and depending on what you gave me here, then I will map it to the right location. So this one is particularly useful when you have a long list of parameters for your function. Think about if you have a lot of this, just make some example. Okay, you got ID, I got like a grid level. I can get more, I can get the major, all of this, right? So you have 5 or 6 parameters. When you're calling the function from the developer point of view, it's very difficult because you got to make sure that you're sending the right number value to the right position. Otherwise, it's going to mess up the information. But now you could say, okay, I don't have to remember that, but as long as I know that you have all of this information, I can just write in any order I want by providing a name, and the Dart will help you to map it. So we see Python. Does Python also have this, right? Is that right? Python? Anyone? Right. So it's I think it's something similar. Not sure about Java. Java maybe not. Okay, some of this kind of optional parameters. All right. So this is a kind of a modern feature which is useful. However, if you learn down some of this best coding practices or clean code principles, how do we for those of you who are 480 class, okay, what do we say about this function parameters? what is the ideal number of input parameters for your functions or methods? 0. Okay, so that is the best practice. Because always think about from the developer point of view. You're calling somebody else library. You create an object, you press dot, and then you see this method. That's what you want, and then no parameter. That's the best feeling, right? So you just need to call it, don't need to worry about anything. But if this one asks you to provide 1, I think that's okay. You can figure it out. But if you see this parameter, sorry, this method asks you to give 3 or 4, the first thing you have to do is switch back to a browser and then go to look for documentation to read carefully to see what they're asking. Okay, so nobody likes that. So if you can have less parameters, it's always preferred. Okay, so this is called optional parameter. We see this a lot in the code. Okay, so go back to the Dart to your app code here. If you see how we instantiate this my home page, okay, now everything makes more sense. My home page, let's ignore this part. I guess that's how they deal with the super constructor from superclass. But this one here, they use a bracket to wrap it. That means both of these are optional. So you are only providing the title. So that's why you put the title, colon, and the value for the title. All right, so that's how they actually structured this part here. So let's see if I have any other examples. Not much other examples. All right, let's see what else. So this one here is all about optional. Yeah, they give you this example where you can pass for the rectangle class, original point, width and height. So 3 parameters. So when you create the class, you could have all these different options to create it. You can have a non-parameter just with orange original points or with everything here. Okay, this is very flexible. Okay, so that's optional parameter. And then next one is the factory. So when I look at the factory, it's mainly just talking about some example of how they do the inheritance and everything. So this one here, I think for the short term, I don't think you're going to create a lot of big inheritances. Interface maybe, but the good thing about this part is everything works almost the same as Java. So they have interface, they have abstract class, they have inheritance, override, all this kind of a typical feature. So it's all the same. So I think we'll talk a little bit more when we start to use that. For example, later on, we might need to create some interface for fetching the data from different sources. So that might be a good opportunity to look at this. But if you read this one, most of this makes sense. So they still have implements and extended keywords exactly the same as Java. This one here talks about implement interface, how that works. And finally, they also have this functional programming. So again, this one, once we see it, we can actually, we can go through this very quickly. So basically, this is a motivating example. Now, if you have this list of numbers, and if you want to iterate every single one, what we do is using a for each loop. That's a very, it's a simpler loop than the for I equals 0, that kind of loop. So you print every single number one by one. So you use this 3 lines of code from a loop to do it, right? But if all you need is to print the number, you could just write it in a different way. I think it's something like this. Oh, actually, it's maybe this one here. No, that gave you the length, and I think something like this. Okay, so if this is like a collection, and then you kind of generate a map, and then you attach another function. So for each of the element here, you're gonna print it. Okay, so this is start become available in many languages, including Java. I think Java 8, they start to kind of introduce this kind of programming. There's another language you do this a lot. Function language. There is it's a language. The one using big data a lot. There is a Scala, right? Yeah. So so that one actually uses a lot of this one to do the program to because a lot of things are dealing with data iteration and calculation, all of this. All right. Yeah, so this once we see it, you know, then try to learn how to use that one. So, but anyway, most of the time when you have a list or a collection of data, map, all of this is a perfect use case for this kind of function. So we're not going to talk too much. Just try to learn enough for us to understand this code better. All right. So any questions? Okay, so let's actually go back to the app. All right, so let's try to look a little bit more things here. All right, so I will start the emulator. All right, so how many of you have started work a little bit on the UI part? Okay, oh, very cool. Yeah, so I guess we are going a little bit slow, but you know we'll catch up. Okay, so I think for the first 2 or 3 weeks, again, the most important thing is to work on the UI, and you don't even worry about the function. Later on, we'll move on to the function part. Most of the time, you're going to deal with all the backend stuff. So probably we recommend you to use Firebase. That's a very simple way to integrate that with the app. But if you haven't, again, as I told you last time, the best way is to just modify the code and then adding something on top of it and then try to learn things little by little, okay? So let's try, see if I can run my app here. Not sure how long it's gonna take. And while we're waiting, okay, so go back to this screen. This is the second screen we created. And then this one has some text, has a flat button, has another text and text, and there's also a floating button, all right? And so I just want to show you, if you want to make some of the simple screen, how would you start with? So let's go on with this one. All right, so it's not too slow. That's what we had last time. The main screen, you can, all right, from here, you click on the button, that brings you to the next screen, and you click on the button, and brings you back. Okay, so that's 2 screens. All right, so let's see, if we want to modify this one, we add a little flat button here. Okay, and let's say you want to make a very simple login screen. All right, login screen will have 2 boxes for you to type the username and password, and then a couple of buttons to log in and sign up. Now you already saw how the button works, so I can go here, change this one into login. And then I can, let me just test it very quick. All right, so that goes to login, and then you can then do another one, sign up. All right, so refresh this one. All right, you got 2 buttons. Obviously, the button should be looks better. Flat button doesn't work very well. Let's clean up. Okay, so you don't need all of this. I can just clean up this one's here. I probably don't need a floating button for my login. All right, so just refresh. All right, seems got a little bit better. Okay, and then we can go back here to change it. This one will be the login, or not login, just welcome. All right. All right, so that's what I mean, you know, make your app by modify the code base. All right. So we're missing 2 input boxes. Okay, so then you just need to Google it. All right. So depending on what kind of experience you have, okay. For me, when I do the Flutter, I often use the Android concept because I know what those are called. So I would just Google the same thing. But if you don't know it, that's fine. You can just do like input box, something like this. Okay, so let's try it. I don't know, input box, input text box. Some of those, a lot of things shows up. One thing I do find might be useful is if you look at the official documentation. Okay, let's go through this one. Most of the information you can find from the official doc. And then for the UI part, a lot of things exist here. Okay, user interface. And then you can take a look at some, if you have time, read all of this, give you some better ideas. Another thing you can see is this widget catalog. Looks like this is a place that summarizes all the possible widgets you can have. Just look at this and then check out all the sections. You will know that in the future, if you're looking for something, you can find where they are. So we're looking for something to input stuff, right? So there is an input, there's also a basics. So I'm going to check out what we have in the basics. For the basics, as you can see, app bar, columns, container, images, icons, and then logo, placeholder, this button, row, text, start fold, right? Text looks like that's just a simple text. It doesn't involve with input, so that's not what we want. So that's the text we'll be using. All right, so let's look at anything else like input. There's input. Input has form field. So it doesn't seem to be really the one we want, but when you open it, all right, this is something we want, right? Enter your email. Looks like this is a typical input box, a very similar to the Android stuff, right? So to use that, you can do, just look at the example. You can use this text form field because that's what you can do here. So just look at all these examples. Find the one you think works best. Also, again, I encourage you to read all of this. I also found there is this material components. It looks like they group all the material design components together. Since by default, this app uses material design, I thought this might be a good option to start with. And you look at here, you find, okay, so they actually have a bunch of, widgets for you to use. One of them is input and selections. I'm going to click on this one. From here, checkbox, date time picker, radio button, text field. Okay, so that still looks like a better, maybe works better for the material design. So I'm going to try the text field. Look at here, don't read all of this. Just look at example, look at code. So this is the type of reference you want to find. With video example, with a short piece of code. You don't want to have a large amount of code that to copy. Okay, because it takes longer for you to figure out, and it's more likely to have errors. This is a kind of perfect example for you to use. So when I see this, I decide to just use this one. So I'm going to copy this, all right, the whole text field, pretty straightforward, and I go back to my code. And if you look at this one, it's very straightforward because everything I told you has been aligned vertically one after another. So this is the title, button. So I'm going to put my thing here on top of the one of the buttons. So I'm going to copy this one here. And when you see error, just make sure you're copying everything is correct. And in this case, you're missing a comma. Everything has to be separated, right? So let's try it. So I bring a new text field. Go back to my app, and I got this little text box here. Okay, I can hide. And also, it's very cool. It's actually hide all the password. And then if you go back to see why, because there is a obscure text field is set to be true. So if I set to be false, try this again, and that shows up. All right, so that's how you can just learn it by just trying, and you don't really need to go to look at all the documentation. There's another one called decoration, and this one obviously sets the label text. That's what it shows here at the top. And then the border, you can use this online input border. I'm sure there are other options, and you can Google and see what other options you have. But you need to know that this one is a material design style. I think you can see this in Android, but probably not in iPhone. But they are able to render the same thing for the iPhone as well, right? So if you know this, I can then make another one for my email or username. So I can just change this one to the email. This one I don't need to hide. So put this one here. refresh, and then you got their email. All right, so here you can type the email, and then here you do the password. All right, that's how you can make this quick, very quick. So in the beginning, you will need to basically search a lot and find out the best example for your use case. That's why I think, you know, the earlier you can confirm your project idea, the better, because you know what you want to make. There are just so many things to learn from for Dart Flutter. So if we just simply go through, for example, I would just tell you, learn all of this one after another. Okay, it won't work. You know, after we learn all of this widget, when you start making, you still don't remember anything. Okay, so that's why if you are very clear on what you want to make, let's just focus on making your app work, making your functions work. That's it. At the end, you start to realize, okay, some of these things you do very often, you become very familiar with. There will still a lot of things you don't know, but that's okay. In the future, if you keep doing all of this, you will learn more. All right. So I just want to give you a very quick example on how today you learn this Flutter with resources, with search and Google, all of this. Okay, it's not that difficult. However, in the beginning, my advice is you should be extremely careful about this part, because most of the UI are specified here. The syntax, I won't call it a good syntax. I think it's, you know, Android XML is even better than this because it's too many characters. But also, again, there's a trade-off. The good thing about this one is here, everything is in Dart file. You don't have the second type of file for your development. So it's also, you know, to that extent, it's actually better. So anyway, get familiar with this one and try to use this format feature. You know, just this one here. Try to make your code looks better. Looks like it's a very useful feature. All right, any questions? Okay, so next time we're going to talk about the layout. Okay, very important part on the UI, how we really align things and separate things. For layout, there are so many different ways. I'm only going to teach the way I know how to do it, but you know, you just need to find out your way. But I probably will try to figure out something really easy for you to use without learning too many different kind of configurations. All right. Okay, guys, I will see you next on Thursday.